How's it going, folks? And welcome back to the Grazing Game. This is episode number 3, and it's actually the first interview on the show. And I was lucky enough to have been joined by Adam Rabjohns. Adam grazes down in Goulburn, New South Wales, on about 300 hectares with his dad, where they run about 340 breeders, primarily Angus cross cows with some Mashona genetics thrown in there, which we discuss, and then they also grow out about 100 steers of their own. So it was a really great conversation. We dove into his grazing techniques. He's a proponent for non-selective grazing, and a bit about their landscape and how they're marketing their livestock. So I hope you enjoy it. If you do, feel free to leave a review, and don't forget there's a school community that I've just created for like-minded producers, and just a place where people can connect, which is in the show notes. So I hope you guys enjoy. Adam, thanks for joining me on the very first episode of the Grazing Game, mate.
Fantastic, Cameron. Glad to be here.
So for people who aren't familiar with the part of the world that you're grazing in, what are some of the characteristics of your landscape, maybe the size of your property, the species of your grasses, some soils?
Yeah, okay. Well, we've got 300 hectares in the southern tablelands of New South Wales. It's the tops of our hills are about 900 metres, and down valleys it's down to 600. So we've got quite a change in elevation on our property. Most of it is basalt, acidic basalt. So we're around that sort of 4.2 to 4.5 pH, which is basically on the limit of what legumes and things like that will actually establish in. And we've got a small amount of quartzy, more gravelly, lighter country, but there's probably only 20 hectares of that. Our predominant grasses, they're all basically C3s, although we're starting to see more C4s come through with the better rest periods that we're allowed to give with the total grazing. But the majority has really been Phalaris for us. My old man did a fair bit of pasture renovation, and added things like cocksfoot and Phalaris and subclovers, and we ended up with, it was a sheep property to start with, and then we transitioned to cattle, and we've now got no sheep, and that sort of happened over probably 40 years or something like that. So the only species that really thrived would be the Phalaris, and that was probably because paddocks were more set stocked, not 100% set stocked, but rotationally grazed. But it might be that they graze a paddock for a month and it's a 20 hectare paddock or something like that. And clearly Phalaris is the toughest, most unpalatable grass, and that's what we ended up with. It is a fantastic grower. It has, huge bulk when it does grow, but at the same time, it does mature into a really fibrous sort of tussock. So it has its challenges with stockpile times when we leave it to rest,
Yep.
and then have to come back in winter. But since we've started the total grazing, we're now seeing cocksfoot just coming back by itself. We've added quite a lot of clovers to the pastures, just broadcast hard seed legumes, clovers, balancer, arrowleaf, bits of mixes of whatever I could find fairly cheap. And that's been fantastic as well. The longer rest periods really do allow those species to establish and then also set seed again for the following year. So
Yep.
we're finding that the pastures are changing, and especially this year, it's been our sort of most noticeable step change. We find a little step each year after the stockpile, and we've gone through and then sort of non-selectively grazed that stockpile. That what comes back the following year, there's quite a visual step change that happens there. But it seems like this year's even even more so, which is fantastic.
And are you
Just
noticing with those by you're getting more of those C4 species? Is your when's your typical growing season? Is that getting later in the year?
it's funny because we usually have uh, moist, cool autumn winters. That's usually when our most predictable rain is. We can have springs and summer that don't eventuate, which can be fairly tough. But when you give the plants enough rest before regrazing, um, then it seems to be less important. And the fact that we've got uh, areas that we're stockpiling, and we only really ever focus on the best quality grass in that property. Um, Even if you miss the spring, uh, you've still got the feed there to handle that late break or whatever. Last
Yeah.
year I think we had 5 months in a row last year that were the bottom 10 to 30th percentile in our recorded rainfall history,
Yep.
um, right in the middle of spring. So when other people were really feeding out hay again
Mm.
by the start of summer, we were just starting into our stockpile again and weren't worried at all.
Absolutely. And do you have you previously, or do you guys do any winter crops or any forage crops like that, or it's not
N-
quite worth your time at the moment?
No, and I've played around a little bit with some multi-species um, cropping, but I don't really want to kill what's there. I always
Mm.
find if I kill a paddock, then it takes that 6 to 9 months to really be as productive as what was already there.
Mm.
So I could just wait for the paddock to recover by itself.
Yep.
So most of our work that we're doing now, we've got a little a 3-tine deep ripper that I do a little bit of soil aeration, and that trickles seed down the rip lines as well. So we're adding a multi-species through that, but it's not destroying what is there at all. So it's really just adding diversity, and I like that because I can still use those paddocks if I need to use them. I can do that, and it's not going to affect the overall productivity of that paddock.
I saw you guys trialed out a soil key. What did you think of that? I've been intrigued by them for a long time. I've never actually seen one, but yeah, how did you find the results from it?
Uh, it was quite amazing. Um, it's definitely not suited to our property. We've got um, basalt soils which just have, you know, football size rocks completely throughout the whole lot. So having a machine that's really rotating and tilling the soil, it was incredibly hard on parts. I'd spend, you know, at least a third of the day under the machine tightening bolts and fixing, broken blades and things like that. So um, that it was too hard on it for that. But even 3 years later now, I can still see green strips of cocksfoot just running up and down the paddocks where that soil key machine went through. So whatever action it has, it seems to really get that balance right of incorporating the organic matter and reseeding and aerating and doing all of that. So there is definitely something to it. It's not something that we're looking at doing it again, literally just because of the maintenance and time that it took. We're finding that we can do sort of the keyline style stuff instead. Um, but if you've got country that could handle a rototiller,
Yeah.
I think it would be definitely worth your time.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe your country's a little bit hard for it. Might be a bit suited to
Yeah.
some more, yeah, easier clays. Yeah, awesome. And so there really any times of the year before we get onto the livestock that you kind of got to intervene mechanically to get rid of any of your old mature winter growth, or you're pretty well fine. You can keep on top of it.
No, we never intervene at all. It really comes down to that winter grazing or the use of your stockpile. And if you can supplement your cattle with some extra protein so that they can utilize that feed, and you're moving them frequently, then if you can get rid of the real majority of that sort of what people call rank feed, um, which with it's surprising what a bit of protein will do, and the cattle will just consume it, and the dung will still be fantastic. Um, that instead of it just standing and oxidizing, it's going through their room and it's being processed there. It's going to be filled with bugs and bacteria and things like that, and it's going back down into the soil. So um, I just see, once upon a time we'd always just have rank
Mm.
phalaris, or we've struggled for my whole life um, with serrated tussock. It would just be rank and go to seed every year, and you know now the cattle eat it over winter, it comes back bright green, and they eat it again during the growing season as well. So um, no, we don't
Yeah.
do anything. It's just
Yep.
another job that I don't want.
That very good. So I guess that's a pretty good detailed description of the map, I guess, or the land base on which you're operating. So moving over to the livestock. So are you guys predominantly just a cow calf operation, or do you do a bit of trading, or you've done a bit of trading before, or?
Yes, we moved away from trading. We When I first got into total grazing, we decided we'd like to get out of our breeders, because there's always a reason not to sell your own special genetics that you've got. They're either in calf, or they've just had a calf, or having the calf and you've just weaned them, and there's always some little excuse why, oh, I can't get rid of them now. Um, but we got away from that after the 2019 drought. We got out of all of our breeders. We'd already reduced our herd and reduced our herd and reduced our herd, um, as we ran out of feed and bought more hay, and then needed more money, so we sold more cattle and bought more hay, and we end up with not enough cattle, not enough hay, and not enough money. So that was when I sort of first told the old man that maybe we should have a look at doing things a little different. And so we decided we'd jump into some cattle trading. Um, and at the same time, we we'd done the total grazing course, and we figured we'd give that a fair crack. And what we didn't realise at the time was that to have a whole farm going with animals that are high production animals, you need those animals to be on the best feed possible. And non-selective grazing that you're doing in the total grazing course quite often leads to lower individual animal performance, but the sort of offset there is that you can run quite a lot more animals. So maybe double your stocking rate. And while we're still learning, um, we did that for a full year. And probably what we should have just done was keep with a more selective graze, because it's always easy to look at your grass and say, oh, they could eat a bit more, they could eat a bit more, when really we should have just been looking at the animals and saying, let's get them fat and get them off as ASAP. So after that, going slow with the cattle trading, we decided, why don't we get back into breeding and try and have a herd that is, mixed animals, that we can have the majority doing a total graze, and we can still have a smaller herd for growing and trading that is doing a less selective graze, or a more selective graze, sorry, in areas where the breeders could then come back through and do a non-selective graze after. So at the moment we're predominantly we've got predominantly breeders. We've got about 340 cows and heifers, and I guess we've got 100-ish steers, something like that. Weaned steers and rising 2-year-old steers. So that's where we're at with that. And I think it's a good balance too. You've got your big mob of mature cattle that can handle the non-selective graze a lot easier, and you've got a small quantity that you can still be a bit more selective with, and still aim for those really high individual animal gains.
Yeah. So like kind of a little bit of that leader follower type setup with the steers coming in.
It's a lot like that. It's a bit different in the way that a lot of people would do a leader follower, where the growing group is 2 days in front, and then it's followed by the cleanup mob just a day or two later. The way that the total grazing program has it set up is that they're actually a full rotation in front of the other mob. So if our rotation's 80 days, the steers go through and do a bit of a selective graze 80 on day one, and then 80 days later the cows come back through and do a non-selective graze. And that way you don't get the cows having to really eat really poor forage after the steers have already gone through. So
Yeah.
you get a bit of a balance that way.
Yep. And so when you went away from trading, bring back in your own breeders, what did you bring in? Was it just purebred Angus?
Yeah, it was just commercial Angus. We tried to aim for a more moderate frame Angus, because we knew that was already the way we were going to go with our AI, with going towards a Mashona cross.
Yes. Yep.
So that we got back into breeding. We bred with some local Angus bulls, and they were big framed. They were really big framed.
Yep.
And so probably seven frame, maybe nearly 8. One of the bulls was.
Yeah. Okay.
We could just see, even which is fine if you're doing a selective graze all the time. That's what they're bred for, and they've been bred to do that, and they're going to thrive in a feedlot, and they're going to thrive under a selective graze. But once you start putting the pressure on them, those big, tall, lanky animals, they're usually the first ones to really show the signs of stress. So they lose body condition quicker, and body condition is king for reconception and fertility. So we ended up going away from that, and we dabbled a little bit with some Australian Heritage Angus before jumping in with the Mashona.
Yeah, and so you kind of knew maybe that was an advantage of when you started trying to non-selectively graze with the trade cattle that you'd bring in. You kind of got an idea for the the phenotype or the animal that you knew didn't work on your type of operation. And
Yeah,
so,
yeah. That first year, I wasn't sure if it was, you know, poor management that didn't get it to work, but you very quickly realise that a straight Angus, especially a lot of the modern Angus, are really aimed to be the highest daily producing animal per head. And to do that, you've got to have exceptional feed, and you've got to, most likely be feeding out some supplement. Whether it's some grain or some just DDGs or
yep.
extra hay or whatever it is. They really thrive on that. You know, really exceptional feed, and the production, the daily production that they put out is huge as well. But as soon as you start trying to get them to eat a higher percentage of the feed that's out there, the quality drops a little bit, and those animals just straight away tail away. So we knew we had to go to some animals that were probably a bit smaller framed, and animals that were adapted to
Mm.
a non-selective graze, and
Yeah.
the Mashona really seems to thrive. And we you go into the paddocks now and you can pick the Mashona crosses out straight away.
Mm.
They're black, they're shiny, they're fat. So it
Yep.
the proof is there for you to see every single day that you go out. And
Yeah.
can't wait to have some more, actually.
We've mentioned the breed quite a few times, but for people that might not know what the Mashona breed is, and I'm certainly interested in them, in the future, trying to introduce some of their traits into my herd. But could you tell us a little bit about, I guess, the Mashona breed, some of their characteristics that make them suited for where you are in your environment?
Yeah, well, so I believe that they were the cattle from the Shona tribes people in Zimbabwe, and so basically these were animals that have not been um, you know commercially produced. They've never been grown for maximum animal production or anything like that. They've had very little human intervention, um, for performance wise. Um, so the main drivers for them was, that they might go and pull a plough during the day, and then they go out to feed for a couple of hours. Then they have to come back into a corral overnight, because there's lions and predators out there. Um, they had no parasite control, no no additives at all. So these animals have had to really be productive in a pretty rough environment, and and to do that they've had to be parasite resistant, um, easy carvers. They have to be able to maintain their body condition on rough feed and limited feed time as well. And then at the end of the day, they had to come back and reproduce in the corral as well. So um, they're a smaller framed animal. They can be polled, they can be horned, they can be black, they can be tan, um, but they're generally smaller framed, sloping rump for easy calving, and obviously very little parasite control as well. Since we've had the Mashona crosses, we've made it a uh, fairly sort of major point not to do any parasite control on them.
Mhm.
So while we wormed and and did fluke treatments for the rest of the Angus cattle, we really didn't do anything for the Mashona cross. I wanted to be as tough as I could on them
Mhm.
to see whether they were actually up to it. And so far they've been great.
Yep.
One of the other advantages of them is they they recycle the nitrogen through their rumen. I think 10 to 30% better nitrogen cycling,
Yep.
and so that nitrogen cycling actually acts as better protein source for them as well. So for the rumen, they can actually run on those lower protein feeds because they cycle that nitrogen back through a lot better.
I've heard the
So
Ngoonies are a bit like that too, aren't they? It might be a South African.
yeah, and I think they've sort of done a fair bit of research, and it shows that the Mashona and the Nguni, they're very closely related. So um, if either of those breeds are probably very similar in their production, you know,
Yep.
output. Um, for us, the Nguni's a bit speckly, and we just
Mm.
thought if we can stick with the black coat down here, um, not that it's going to perform any better, you know, other than just visually. So and for market acceptance. So that's
Yeah.
why we went that way.
Yeah, just kind of commercial viability kind of thing. I've
Yeah.
saw there was a mob on Auctions Plus of it might have been 15 Nguni steers or something, and they were on there for 3 or 4 weeks. They just got passed in every single time.
Okay, I should have. I wish I
Yeah,
knew.
like, but I guess it's just people don't not that
No,
much
and
acceptance of them yet.
if especially if you're going in, if you're going to be trading them, you want something that is predictable and that you're going to get your return on. And for us down here, that's Angus and doing a selective graze. That's the way to go, and that's why I believe that's probably why you know people want those black animals down here so much because they've got that name to them. So
Yeah, and I think even just going off some of your photos you've taken of your progeny, your Mashona calves, they apart from the slick coat and that they're very similar looking. Like I think a
yeah,
lot of people would struggle to, especially in a composite of like Angus Mashona. I don't know
yeah.
if many people would be able to just be like, that's not purebred Angus straight
No,
away.
exactly, exactly, and you know it's funny because we did there at I think I think about a month after weaning, we did a bit of a weigh in and a breakdown of the animals, and I believe all of the Mashona animals came within the top 20%
Mm.
of daily um, daily gains
Yep.
for the whole mob. So clearly, there's a significant difference there between um, those Mashona cross Angus and just the straight Angus as well. So
Yeah.
forget just off the top of my head, I should have had that, but it's just funny that out of 160 animals,
That
the
they were.
30 Mashona were in the were in the top 50 animals.
So how do you go about introducing those genetics into your herd? And yeah, I guess where do you source that from?
So we did some AI. Our first year, I I couldn't really find too much that was for that Mashona genetics in Australia. But CSIRO in the early 90s brought some Mashona in as they could see the benefit um, in their own research as to how it could help the Australian herd. So I managed to get, I think we started with 40 straws from them, and then after seeing those calves, we we
Do you know
got
that bull, the straws?
no. There was a couple of bulls, and I'm not 100% sure which animals there were. There was very little information on them, so I was kind of flying a little bit blind there. Um, I don't think they were particularly small framed animals because most of the that first batch, they're still, they're still looking like five frame animals
Mm.
as well. Um, then they're probably not. They're probably four. I don't.
Yep.
I haven't measured them any
Yep.
time recently either. But they certainly weren't low lines or something like that.
Mm.
They weren't
Yes.
little animals, um, and that's not what we're getting as calves either.
Yep.
But the second year we went with Zimbob, who's actually a red polled animal that was sort of recommended by Jamie Elizondo and Johan Zeitsman. We went with them, and that's the calves that we've got on the ground now. And I've got no red calves came out of that mob, so um, obviously not a very dominant red gene.
Yeah.
And this year we've now gone with a another black polled Mashona, Maximus,
Yep.
who is once again, recommended by those
Mm.
guys.
And they're from over the states. You just saw semen from over the states. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. I had another bloke that was doing total grazing with me.
Hmm.
He was keen to get some straws in. We got our first batch from Pharaoh cattle actually. They were
Yep.
selling some of the Zimbob straws. I'm not sure if they still are, but I know there is still straws available in Australia.
Yeah.
Um, and and yeah, we imported a tank and went from there.
Yeah, awesome. So for people that are, maybe considering doing something like that, how many, I guess, did you get in, or roughly, or perhaps what were your conception rates like with AI? And then were you just then turning back out your farrow bulls as mop-up bulls? Is that what you were doing? Yep.
Yeah, yeah. So um, our conception rates were a bit low because both years we were using heifers. So this year we've got some cows that we can do the AI with, and hopefully our conception rates are considerably better. Um, and we sort of knew that was a risk with the heifers as well, but it was what we
Mm.
had, so we went with it
Yeah.
anyway.
Yep.
Um,
Exactly.
but I think 30% to 50%, and
Yep.
hopefully this year using using more mature animals that are better suited to it. Hopefully we can get that up around 70 or 80%.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you've got the genetics in there, and you'll just use your own bulls, will you? Once you've like, are you far off with that first Mashona cross that you did with having a bull?
No, so the first year, so last year we had the Pharaoh bulls as mop-up bulls. We also had four yearling Angus bulls that went out with yearling Mashona cross Angus bulls that went out with them.
Yep.
Um, and so this year will be the first year we've got those four um, composite bulls, and now we've got I think nine younger yearling bulls as well with them.
Oh,
And
cool.
I'll probably do another little selection before they go out. There's a couple of little bulls that I'm not 100% sure on. One's a little bit skittish, and the other one looks just generally lightweight. So there's still some selection to go on there. And um, once once we've done that, we can. I'm thinking that we'll probably do a genetic test of the calves this next year, DNA test to try and see who the dad is, and then we can select the most prolific bull each year to definitely keep.
Mm.
And but yet we're now selecting our own bulls. We're not buying in any more bulls.
No, that's a really good detailed picture of your herd and your landscape. And so you've mentioned a few times total grazing. So why don't we talk a little bit about how your grazing management, and what you're doing to manage the relationship between your herd and your landscape. So for people, I guess, that don't know about non-selective or total grazing, some of the principles, I guess.
Yeah, well, to break it down in the simplest sort of way, um, we're aiming for a non-selective graze. So we try and graze 80 to 90% of what's there in front of the cattle each day. We're currently doing twice a day moves. So we've got some polywire lifters that we set up each day, and they do a move at 8 a.m. and 2 p.m. And so basically, there's two different styles of grazing. There's non-selective, where you really ask the animals to clean up as much as possible, or there's selective grazing where they go through and do whatever percentage that you're aiming for, like graze a third, trample a third, or leave a third, or 50-50, or whatever it is. But when you're doing a selective graze, um, you you're not actually, you can't do a 50% graze or a 30% graze, because the animals will go straight for the highest quality feed and eat that straight to the ground. And then you're left with, your tall rank phalaris is what we'd be left with. All the clover would be gone. All the intermediate grass would be gone, and we're left with big chunks of rank phalaris. And so we found that was really, we'd seen over 40, 60 years that transition was leading to a pasture that was just dominated by one species, and it was a poorer quality species a lot of the time. The serrated tussock thrived, the phalaris thrived, and everything else struggled. With a non-selective graze, everything's taken down to, I don't know, 50 mils, 100 mils, whatever you can do while also maintaining the body condition of your animals. So if you've got genetics that can't handle it, you can be more selective. If you've got great genetics, you can be really non-selective. And so once it's been taken down to, an equal level everywhere, that really allows the best species, the ones that can recover the fastest and the ones that can handle your climate the best, to recover the best as well. And it just so happens that is almost always a wide-leafed grass, because they've got the solar panels to recover fastest. The serrated tussock being, fine, spiny type of tussock, it barely recovers by the time everything else is really recovered. And we come back through and do the graze once the other stuff's recovered, and it overgrazes the tussock as well. So we are definitely seeing a change in the pasture composition that way. Lots of the clovers and the cocksfoots are coming back. We're also seeing more of the C4s during summer. So that's sort of the non-selective and selective grazing. And then after that, we basically have two growing seasons. We've either got a growing season and a non-growing season, whether that is winter or summer or whenever the non-growing season happens. It can be whatever your climate is. So through the growing season, which for us is usually spring to autumn, we just focus on the paddocks that are the best quality. So if we start at paddock number 0 and we've got 100 paddocks, just for example, we will graze that 0 paddock on day 1 when it's ready. And for us, that seems to be just before it's going to seed. There's probably a little bit of yellowing happening on the lower leaves, and that's where we find that protein to fiber balance is perfect for the animals to be, really well producing and be healthy. They're not getting acidosis. They're not getting, pink eye. They're not getting lame feet. They're not getting bloat. They're not getting any of those health diseases that are really driven by your pastures, by immature pastures. So we go grazing paddock 1, and then we continue grazing through until that paddock 1 has recovered fully. So if that takes us to paddock 30, we're looking back all the time saying, hey, is number 1 ready?
Mm.
Um, we get to number 30. Yep, it's ready, and we go straight back. So it's basically a small rotation there during the growing season, and the rest of the paddocks, if it gets ahead of you, it just gets ahead of you. It goes into stockpile. That's basically our standing hay. And so for this year, we had that spring that was really dry, 7 months, no, 5 or 6 months that were really dry. We got back to paddock 1 and we started our rotation again. And then when we got to paddock 30, oops, paddock 1 wasn't recovered yet. So all we did was expand our rotation a bit bigger, went into paddock 31, 32. We got to 60. And then by that time, we'd had enough rain and recovery. We could head back to paddock 1.
Yep.
So it's the way I see it, it's like the rotation just expands and contracts depending on your grass recovery, and and that's really it. When finally, if you get to the end of the growing season, there will become a point where that paddock number 1 never recovers enough. So you then start marching out into paddock 61, 62, and there you're into stockpile. Those paddocks have had, basically a year's rest,
Mm.
and the amount of feed in those paddocks is just huge. So you've got to be more on on track with paddock sizes,
Yep.
and you've also likely got to be looking at some kind of a protein supplement. Not always, but if it's high fiber feed, which our Phalaris usually is, and you've got not enough clovers, then looking at some kind of fiber supplement just to increase the rumen function. It's really the smallest amount possible, just to keep the rumen ticking over so that they can digest that high fiber feed. And that then gives you a chance really early on in the non-growing season to be able to adjust your stocking rate too. You can say, okay, it's, winter's going to be 3 months. I've got 100 hectares left, and they're doing 100. They're doing a hectare a day, and they're, how much feed do I have? It's going to take them, 100 days worth of feed, and I've only got 90 days.
Yes.
Let's destock now.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of different options. You could destock. You might find that you've got heaps of feed. You could up your stocking rate. You could
Yep.
choose to buy some more hay. You could do whatever you want.
Yes.
But very early on, you can sort of see what you can do and where you're situated, so that you can make an early decision.
Yep. And there's so many different directions we could go in, but are you, hypothetically, that paddock 0, are you alternating which paddock 0 you're starting at each year, or are you constantly sticking to your best pastures and starting there?
No, we try and alternate where those pastures are. So now we've got a rough idea of when our pastures will be fully recovered in spring after that stockpile graze. So we know generally by the 1st of October. This year it's looking like it could be a month early, but generally by the 1st of October, those paddocks have recovered, and we jump back into an area that's been stockpiled, then goes into our rotation. And it's amazing. You see those paddocks that, and until you've seen it happen on your property, this is usually one of the first questions someone asks me is, what do you do with all this rank feed? Is it really worth it? What are you going to do with it? When you see the recovery after that non-selective graze and a long rest period, it just explodes out of the ground. You can have a paddock right next to each other, one that's been rested in stockpile and one that's been grazed the year before, and the quantity of feed, it might be twice the difference. It's so huge to see the recovery that plants make when they've got strong root reserves after
Yep.
a year off. So it's quite unbelievable.
Yep. And how do you find with the twice a day moves, and there's a lot of people that probably push to go harder. How do you I guess calculate the economics and the return on investment? Is there a threshold where it's like we get the most ecological progress on our properties, but then we're also not going broke on one hand? Like, is there a sweet spot for you guys? And is that two moves a day?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure exactly where that is. It's probably different for every every property. It's different for every environment, but for us, it seems to be, we started on our whole journey. We'd do the monthly rotation, then we decided we'd go for weekly, and then we got down to 3 days, and then we've done 1 day, and now we're to twice a day moves. Each time that you do that, that breakdown of an extra move, you see that the animals can utilize more without going without a reduction in the body conditions. So I'm not exactly sure where that optimum point is. We're actually just refencing nearly the whole place at the moment. We did do, like we'd had all the property was watered from dams, and so we did a sort of a hub and spoke design where we would water them from the dams, and then from there we would have all of our fences going from there,
Like a
um,
wagon wheel kind of setup?
like a
Yep.
wagon wheel setup. But we're
Yep.
finding with our really big mobs, 300 head, and they're on that on that dam for maybe maybe a week or something like that. They really trash it.
Mm,
Every animal's got to be a little bit further in than the last one to get the freshest water.
yep.
Dams are at the bottom of the hills, so that's where it's the boggiest. We have
Yes.
gateways around there to try and get them into each paddock. So we've now got ourselves a little trough set up, that we're going to run in alleyways and refence into just big long strips that have
Yep.
access to water. So we're we're sort of finding that the amount of work that you need to do in a nice straight strip is much less than
Yep.
all these little triangles around dams and things like that to try
Absolutely.
and calculate it and do all of that.
Yeah, making it easy. Yeah, I think that's definitely the direction that I'm trying to head in, is making these water lanes, and using the gate lifters and things like that. I think logistically trying to do this type of grazing seems like it will be the easiest. Just touching on that winter supplementation, are you guys using a bit of urea, or what are your kind of main ingredients that you're doing to help digest that fibre?
Yes, we've done a few things in the past. We've used canola meal,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I was using. So we've done a few different ways. We've done canola meal in tubs, that needs to be kept fairly dry, or else it gets sticky. We were using canola meal with a cottonseed tailings, which is a bit dusty and hydrophobic, which seemed to actually work quite well with the mix to keep it dry. Um, and then we could add a little bit of urea if we wanted to up the protein. It was good doing it that way because I could add biochar, and the urea and the canola meal and anything else that I wanted in there. This year we've actually gone to just lupins, and we've been feeding them straight under an electric wire, and we're seeing really good results with that. They're big enough that the cattle can pick them up out of the grass, and you're not having problems with tubs getting wet and you know urea and things like that. So urea is good and it's cheap. You've got to be really careful when you use it not to poison animals. So you've got to introduce it slowly. You've got to make sure that you understand how urea works. It's very fast acting in the rumen, so it can poison them quite easily. Um, and the other thing with urea, it doesn't give any energy. It doesn't. It doesn't really help. It doesn't help supplement the animal too much, other than that allows the fiber to be broken down a little bit better by the rumen. So we're actually finding much better results with the lupins. Maybe I know you can do soybeans and things like that, and maybe with we found that the lupins whole, we're just feeding them whole. We found that the calves rumens don't digest them particularly well. So we're even looking at maybe in the future looking at a little pelletizer or something like that
Mm.
that we can set running and have enough to do,
Yep.
each day, every second day. So at the moment we're doing about so we feed it 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday,
Yep.
and we do about a kilo an animal. So it's 1.5 kilos per week, which I'm not sure what that is per day,
Yep.
but it's very little when you think about the fact that they can then utilize a huge amount in the
Yeah.
in the stockpile feed.
That's the main goal, is to once you move on to that stockpile feed, use that supplement to help them digest it better and get
Yeah,
more of a non-selective graze, you think, on those mature plants?
yeah, and it helps them keep their body condition too. So
Mm.
without that supplement, the rumen just can't digest it. The rumen slows down. You start getting your dung stacking up in big piles everywhere, and it's just a sign that your animals are going backwards. That's really what's happening. Um, so one of the things as well, sort of, you've got to have your supplement on site before it's ready before you need it, because it does take them a week or so for their rumen to change and start digesting that alternate protein source a little bit better. Um, and this was a trap that we fell into the first couple of years, was that we didn't have it on site. So then by the time we realized, oh, we need it, then you've got to ring around
Mm.
and figure out where the best price is, who's doing what, who can get it to you. There's a week doing that, then you know it's 2 weeks before we can deliver it. Then you get it on
Yep.
site. You've got to figure out how do we get this stuff out again? What's the best way to get it out?
Yeah.
How many troughs do I need? All of these different things. Um, where if it's on site, you can start a little bit early, get it fine tuned, and then once you're into the stockpile, you're set. So
Yes.
um, having it on site and 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 having the animals used to it just a little bit early is a real game changer.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point and a really good tip. Look, I want to respect your time, Adam. I'm sure you got a lot to do. I just had one more question, and it's around so I guess the marketing aspect. So now, you've managed your landscape, you've produced these animals. Where are you looking to sell them, to sell your saleable product?
So we're looking at we're actually looking this year. We've still got animals that are the straight Angus, so I can't the Angus calves. So we're actually looking at bringing some animals in this Friday and maybe picking the top 20 out or something like that to just sell on Auctions Plus. But with our composites, we were really interested to see whether we could produce an animal and grass feed an animal all the way through to finish, sort of in 24 months. And if that's the case, which we're pretty confident that we can do that, um, our local abattoir has sort of a grass fed premium, so we want to just come in at their lightest possible weight, fully finished, grab the premium, and have an animal that's fully finished. Then they're not being put through feedlots. None
Yeah.
of that sort of stuff's happening. So um, the
Yep.
feedlots, quite often it's pretty hard to beat a feedlot for return. They
Mm.
they know they can. they know they can pump the feed into them and get a good return on their end, so they're happy to pay a premium. I have previously um, sold directly to a local feedlot, and that's good. But I just don't really like the idea of animals in feedlots, to tell you the truth. Um, there's I don't really see the advantage in it in any way other than just um, you know a, a production increase
Mm.
there on their end as well. The animals
Yep.
that do the best for them aren't the animals that do the best for us either. So
Yes.
there's a conflict of interest there, and I'd like to be producing beef that's as healthy as possible for human consumption as well. So that's that's cows eating grass.
That's it. No, awesome, Adam. I really appreciate your time. Where can people maybe find you if they want to see a bit more about those calves that are growing out and what you guys are doing? Yeah, if they want to follow along.
Yeah, we've just got a Facebook group, Leaston Pastoral. I try and post up anything that I find interesting on there, so it might go a few months between posts, but usually I try and keep the posts pretty interesting. So jump on there, see what we're up to, and hopefully we have more people jumping in and tagging along with us.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for that, Adam.
Thanks, Cam. Have a good day, mate.